Thank you, RTCA, for the past couple of days. Just a fabulous symposium, and this has been in the making for months, and a lot of people don't know what it takes to put something like this together. And so can we thank RTCA and all of the staff for just a fabulous job they've done today for us this week. Thank you. And thank you for saving the best topic for last, of course, which is commercial space operations, a growing, rapidly growing industry, a significant part of our economy, with many different elements: space launches, space tourism, of course, and spaceport infrastructure that's needed. And of course, the complexities of the missions are changing rapidly, and they're evolving, and certainly our panel will discuss some of that. And the frequency of some of these missions are changing, and they're expected to increase rapidly moving into the future. So as our panel settles down and settle in a little bit, let me just set the stage for how we're going to conduct this session, which is, by the way, a shortened session. It's a brief session, 45 minutes, so it's going to be some give and take. But what we're going to do is start with the view from the industry first. So we're going to have Kevin Hatton with SpaceX. We're going to have Tim Logan with Virgin Galactic, and Eric Stallmer with Commercial Flight Space Federation provide the industry perspective in terms of what's coming. Then we'll move to Heidi Williams with NBAA, who will talk about the legacy aircraft and the airspace and what they think about all of this. We then will move on to Bill Davis with Air Traffic Organization, who will talk about the challenges with respect to integration of these types of operations. And then we will move to my good friend Mike Romanowski with the Office of the Space at the FAA, who will bring it all together, talk about the vision forward and really what it takes to break down some of the barriers. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Kevin to begin his conversation, about 5 to 7 minutes of opening remarks, and then we'll get to some give and take. Kevin, take it away.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank RTCA. We appreciate the invitation to be here, and we appreciate the interest that the aviation industry is beginning to take in this issue of commercial space integration. Having come from the FAA to SpaceX about a year ago, I had significant background in air traffic control and traffic management and next-gen. So it's interesting to see this evolution and this collaboration that we're starting to forge going forward to look at what the integration is going to look like in the future. So just a little bit about SpaceX and where we're at today. We've currently, the Falcon 9 is our primary launch vehicle currently. We've completed 34 successful missions of the Falcon 9. Our launch cadence continues to increase, so we're looking at, between now and the 1st of July, 3 launches just within that time frame. So we definitely see this as an area where we're going to continue improving and continue working to increase that launch cadence. So our short-term goal for that is something like reaching 1 launch every 2 weeks in the short term. And then, of course, we do have longer-term aspirational goals that we're designing the vehicle for and that we're designing our operations for. And ultimately, that aspirational goal is to be able to launch, land, refuel, and launch again within 24 hours, the same vehicle. Now we have, back in March of this year, done the first ever launch and landing of a flight-proven orbital class rocket. And our next launch coming up will also be another flight-proven rocket that's been to space before. So one thing that we see as a driver for increasing demand and increasing the accessibility to space and also reducing the cost of getting to space is this idea of frequent reusability. It's something that is new to the industry. It's something that, we only landed our first stage booster in December of 2015. That was a world first, And now we're already coming up on our second relaunch of a flight-proven booster. So things are progressing quickly. We expect to see continued increase in launch rates. And I think that's an area where there definitely are synergies in looking at what does that mean for the NAS. When you look at our launch locations, we currently are launching out of Kennedy Space Center in Florida and Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. We're working on completing repairs to our Air Force property at Launch Pad 40 in Florida. And so once that's up, we'll have 3 operational pads running, and then we have a longer-term goal of a Brownsville facility as well. So we're seeing a proliferation of launch sites just for SpaceX, and of course, others in the industry have their own plans that you'll be hearing about. So I think it's definitely a NAS-wide issue and question as far as how's the NAS going to react to probably more operations at more locations across the NAS. So currently, in terms of our business, we've got over 70 missions on our manifest. So we have significant launch manifests built up moving forward. That represents about $10 billion in revenue. So we'll be working to keep that manifest moving, and like I said, get to that launch every 2 weeks in the short term. We also have the Falcon Heavy rocket, which will be a new vehicle targeted to fly currently no earlier than late summer. That vehicle will be the world's most powerful rocket in the current time by a factor of 2. And so that will also enable us to service additional customers and additional payloads that require that class of rocket. And then also we provide services to NASA. We transport cargo to and from the International Space Station, and we have a contract to begin transporting astronauts to and from the space station in the near future. So these are all areas that are growing and increasing and contributing to the demand for launches, in addition to another longer-term goal, which is missions that take us beyond Earth orbit. Either we've had interest or discussions of moon, missions that go toward the moon, or missions, of course, to Mars is our ultimate goal. So the company's ultimate long-range goal is to make humanity multiplanetary by enabling this transport to Mars of humans. So that's where we're going in the future. I'm interested to hear the rest of the panel's comments and also any of your feedback on what the challenges are for the NAS and what we might do to meet those.
Thank you, Kevin, for that summary. Appreciate that. Now, Tim, your next Virgin Galactic. What are you all up to these days?
Well, we're doing some pretty exciting things, and Virgin Galactic would also like to thank the RTCA for this panel, and because it's an important subject that's going to affect everybody in the long run. So. With our program, our main goal is to open up space for the public. And Richard Branson has been pretty straightforward on saying that we need to expand above 500 people that have been to space as astronauts. We need to expand that greatly, and that will open up space for a lot of other things as more people experience it. So our space flight system is what we call it, consists of an aircraft called the White Knight 2, that, or also lovingly known as the mothership. First of all, it sounds cool, but it's also our vehicle that carries our spaceship, Spaceship 2, up to about 50,000 feet, where it is dropped and the rocket is ignited, and the spaceship continues up to about above 80 kilometers, which is the official definition of getting into space for those space flight participants, who will be up to 6 people in our spaceship and two astronaut pilots, two test pilots, to take them up, give them about 15 minutes of weightlessness, and then a glide flight down using a unique system of a feathering boom, which allows us to come down a lot slower and not have the heat impact that you saw with the shuttle or any of the other capsules that come back in. So our goal with that is eventually to get up to 2 launches a week. With that, we are currently in flight test out of Mojave, with the goal to move to Spaceport America in New Mexico, just north of Las Cruces, hopefully next year about this time, and then begin commercial operations there. We are building 2 more spaceships, so we will have a fleet of 3 by 2019 to support those operations, with the possibility of being able to operate out of other spaceports in the U.S. and around the world, to be honest with you, once we get up and running and get the system proven. So as you can see, there's a lot of milestones that have to occur. I also will talk about Virgin Orbit, which is an associated company with us, which is taking a 747 and mounting a rocket underneath. If you remember, those of you from the airline side, the 5th pod place where you can mount an engine, we're going to mount a rocket on there and launch small, medium satellites up into orbit from that, and that is almost on the same timeline. So the idea is for them to launch by the end of the year and get that up and running. So we have a lot of exciting things that are coming down the pike, with a lot of groundbreaking type of things to get accomplished, including getting the average person up into space as often as we can. So it's kind of
Tim, can you just let us know, are you going to charge for luggage for those? All right, okay, yeah, just
we can't talk about that right now. The only thing I'm concerned on is the non-rev program is what I'm trying to get at. But other than that, no, I don't think there's going to be much luggage up there for that flight. So.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that. And Eric, your organization represents really a broad industry. I was wondering if you could talk about your organization and kind of, talk about some of what you're seeing in terms of forecast moving ahead.
Sure. I'm in a great position here because I have my customers to my right and my regulators to my left, and what I hope to aspire to be right next to me. And
you're surrounded there.
Yeah, so surrounded in very, very good company here. It's an incredibly exciting time in the commercial space business. As highlighted with what Kevin and Tim just said, that's just really a microcosm of what is going on in the excitement level in the industry. You have companies, just quickly about the Commercial Space Flight Federation. We were started about 12 years ago by a couple of young entrepreneurs, one named Elon Musk, another Jeff Bezos. I think Mr. Branson was there early on, and a few other companies that wanted to expand the personal spaceflight experience and getting what needs to be done to get humans up into space, to expand the realm of space travel beyond the 538 astronauts that have flown to date. So they started this organization, but it has since grown to really encompass the entire ecosystem of the commercial space industry. And I talk too much with my hands, but it's somewhat the best way to describe. It's really from the ground up. The spaceports that are really the infrastructure for tomorrow's transportation. We have about 10 or 11 of the spaceports all around the country, and a couple international ones that we represent. The launch companies that are growing each day. You have your traditional ones that like SpaceX and Blue Origin, and then others. There's newcomers out there that are catering to a market of small satellites. It's a huge trend now of these smaller, much larger constellations that are going up. Sometimes in the order of 100 satellites up to 900. There's even talk of one constellation being over 3,000 satellites. So you have that marketplace, the small, the mid-sized companies through remote sensing and communication satellites. The folks that they're doing space right now, doing things in space right now, such on the International Space Station. There's so many companies to talk about. I feel like an Irish father trying to name all his children. I'm certainly going to leave some out. But when you think of the exciting things that are happening with what Blue Origin and SpaceX have done, the whole idea of reusability. When you can reuse a launch vehicle, like they have successfully demonstrated numerous times, it dramatically brings down the cost to launch and access to space. And it opens up the ideas of what is really possible and what you can do in space. So the ideas that people had, just these huge satellites that would last for 10 years, that's all being replaced with throwaway satellites that you can build in less than a week, the turnaround on these satellites. Launch them, they're up there for a year, and then you bring them down. As I said earlier, on the International Space Station, there's phenomenal research that's taking place. One of the companies we represent is a company called Made in Space. And I think it's a game-changing type of company because there's a bunch of really young engineers right out of college started developing technology on 3D printers. And what if you had a 3D printer in space, and what could that mean? And really that's the building block of the opportunities that are available in space if you have manufacturing in space. And so they launched this bulky, ugly 3D printer. It looked like a Frankenstein 3D printer that they put up on the space station, and it just sat there because the astronauts had so many other things going on. But one day they needed a 5/8 wrench to lock down a bolt that came loose. And the folks down in Johnson Control Center said, why don't you use the 3D printer? We can send one up to you right away, instead of waiting 3 months for the next resupply. And they said, they gave it a shot. Sure enough, the next morning, they opened up the latch, and there was the prescribed wrench they need. So with that technology, this small company of about 5 or 6 individuals got, I believe, a $20 million contract to NASA to build the next generation of additive manufacturing in space, and they're working on that right now. And we're not just seeing that in space, we're also seeing that on the ground, where a lot of the launch companies are integrating the new innovative technology of 3D printing in developing launch vehicles that they're building. We just saw a launch vehicle launch, so Rocket Labs out of New Zealand. It's a kind of a quasi-US New Zealand corporation. And the majority of that launch vehicle is built by 3D printed parts. I was just at a company in Los Angeles that is looking to build 90% of their launch vehicle using a 3D printer. So it's really innovative companies like that, companies that are looking to mine asteroids. That there's a belief that some of these asteroids are made up of 80% from the platinum metal groups. If you can extract 10 pounds of platinum for an asteroid, the marketplace, this could be your first $1 trillion marketplace in space mining. But there's also hurdles that go with that. There's international treaty obligations that we have to abide by, the Outer Space Treaty, which is it's coming up on its 50th year since it's been ratified, and it's become vogue again now. Because of what we're doing in space. And so the gist of what our organization does in the quickest elevator speech possible is to promote and protect what the industry is doing. Promote it through working with Congress on positive legislation, working with our regulators that help streamline the process. The FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation has been a fantastic partner throughout this process of the licensing and with the spaceports, also the payload reviews that they do. So I think it's a small slice of the FAA, but certainly punches way over its weight group in that aspect. I think we've often talked about 2017 is a really interesting year for a lot of the testing and development of what a lot of these companies are doing. And I think in 2018, you're going to see so many different systems become operational. The Falcon 9 Heavy that we mentioned, Virgin Galactic, I feel will be flying in 2018. Blue Origin has their new rocket that they're bringing online. Also some of these smaller ones. So the industry is, pardon the pun, but really taking off on a huge level, and it's exciting to be in. But we also realize there's some challenges, and certainly challenges that overlap with your world on the airspace management. And those are the things that need to be addressed now, so these don't become an issue down the line as this industry continues to blossom. So I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Eric. That was very informative. And now moving on to Heidi. Given what you've heard about what's coming, you are going to talk to us a little bit about the perspectives from legacy operations in the airspace, which is already complex, and what are some of the perspectives, concerns that you see?
First of all, thank you to Margaret and the folks at RTCA. I think we, and my predecessor and I talked a few months ago. We left last year from the symposium thinking a commercial space panel would be such a great addition, and Margaret and her team listened, and we appreciate that. So we're really pleased to be here. I think we come off of an earlier panel that maybe shared the different philosophies, different business models, different perhaps ideas around funding mechanisms for the manned community, existing NASA operators. So perhaps being the closer panel that we are, I'll maybe bring the existing NASA manned operators, commercial airlines, GABA, back to kind of a unanimous stance. And I know Joe and others will correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm speaking for them. But, I think we left last year with the thought that we really needed to begin this dialogue from the perspective of a collaborative nature. So we needed to bring the commercial space operators, we needed to bring the commercial airlines and business aviation and GA to the table, because I think there are going to be challenges. That being said, we also recognize that the FAA's mission around commercial space is not only to ensure safety, but it's to promote a vital industry. Recognizing also at the same time commercial airlines, business aviation, also part of that vital aviation industry that we enjoy here. So access, prioritization around access are some critical discussions that need to take place. I think we're very anxious for all of the users to be brought to the table to engage around some of the challenges that we've seen just in the last few years. As you know, Mike and I were talking earlier, and he said something to me that really kind of was eye-opening. He said, you know, I think I referred to commercial space as a new entrant. And he said, well, you know, they're really not a new entrant. They've been around 30 years. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's actually very true. You know, I think because maybe the business model is new, and perhaps because it's a commercial industry versus, you know, the East and the West space launch areas that we have maybe become accustomed to in the last 30 years, where we saw large swaths of airspace and segregated activities that impacted many other NAS operations. It brings a level of angst to other users of the NAS and perhaps what is coming. I know some of the challenges we've seen just in the last few years where spaceports are popping up all across the NAS, some less than 2 miles from existing major airports, major Air Force bases. So those are some of the things as we look forward and we look to integrate this vibrant community that is doing some really exciting things, bringing all of those users to the table to talk about, you know, to share data, to talk about the challenges, to work through those challenges collaboratively, and embrace one another and our missions and figure out how to integrate and work together is going to be a really key part of the near-term future.
Thank you, Heidi, for that perspective. And now to Bill Davis with the ATO. Having heard the different perspectives from integration, what are some of the challenges that you are working on and that you see?
So thank you. I'd like to echo our thanks to Margaret, Andy for inviting us to the symposium to talk. We're from the ATO perspective, and actually the ATO perspective is really trying to be an enterprise perspective, or taking on it, and we'll resolve a number of challenges. The first one is we're seeking to grow the value of the NAS. So we just heard the competing business model. So we see 3 competing business models where historically there's typically been horizontal aviation. And air traffic in particular was exceedingly good at moving airplanes from airport to airport, and we refined that and honed that. And it was our specialty, and it was our calling, our duty. Now we have the ability to take that and multiply it manyfold as we're able to take on the challenge of introducing UAS and commercial space as competing business models to grow the value of the NAS and improve the economic value of the NAS, the value of the NAS from a national security and defense perspective, from a personal freedom perspective, from a research and commercial business perspective. There's just so much opportunity here that we see. And so we're working to resolve what this interoperability will be. One of the things that we are always having to remind ourselves is that whatever we do, it has to be an enterprise solution. Enterprise from an FAA perspective and from a user perspective. So, as you know, we regulate or we manage air traffic services, and those air traffic services, Heidi mentioned, often happen at airports. And so whatever we do around improving the operations of commercial space, it's very likely that we need to have our airport partners there and our flight standards and safety partners there as well to ensure that the left hand and the right hand of the FAA are acting in synergy. In the midst of that, we have to always be working with our commercial space partners to ensure that that we're moving forward as an enterprise. That's a challenge for an organization historically was focused largely on one role, which is moving airplanes back and forth. And so we're moving. We recognize that, we acknowledge that, and we're moving to update all of the things that are needed to do that. All of our infrastructure, our orders, our procedures, our thinking, and so on. We're seeking integration, not necessarily segmentation or sequestration. We recognize for this to really work for both UAS and commercial space that we have to integrate our automation, we have to integrate our procedures, we have to integrate this operation so that the operations happen seamlessly in a coordinated way rather than in a segmented way. We seek solutions that we can actually implement, that are scalable across the National Airspace System, the NAS, and that are affordable, so that we can actually get the work done and allow people to operate their businesses. We recognize that to have a successful business, that you have to have access, reliable, dependable access to airspace in order to make a schedule and make a business run, as do UAS operators, as do airplane operators, and so that's one of our challenges. So to do that, we're seeking equity. And so understanding the value, how the communities value their resources, time, and so on, is very important for us. And we need to work with each of the communities, and in particular with the Office of Commercial Space, to try to understand that in a way that we can build business algorithms and decision algorithms and so on to operate a national airspace system in an effective, equitable, efficient way that grows the value of the system to the country and to the world. We have to do this in a continuously adaptive way. At any given moment, there's thousands of airplanes in the sky. And they deliver hundreds of millions of people and hundreds of millions of tons of cargo every year. That will go on. So the airplane operations, the point-to-point, airport to airport, you're all going to go home. I suspect most of you flew here if you came from out of town. And so those operations need to happen, and they need to happen safely. And so, I mean, the Air Traffic Organization, in its most essential form, is a safety organization. That's why it was created. So as we do this, we're not looking for apocalyptic change. We're looking for continuous, steady, reliable, implementable, affordable, scalable, adaptive change. And so understanding that and how we can all accomplish that together is very important to us. And so these forums are cherished and valued, and we like to continue to participate. Global interoperability. We recognize if we build something that you can't, that's not useful to you around the world, you're a global industry, as is the aviation industry, as is the UAS industry. That all we're doing is kind of stunting our growth, if you will. So that's another piece that we need to work. From the administrator's perspective, he wants it done yesterday. So I like one of the things he says a lot, and I repeat it, and I'll repeat it here. He says he wants us moving at the speed of business, not at the speed of government, to get this done. And so he recognizes that and he's urging the whole organization to move out of their traditional comfort zones and move into areas where they're a little bit less comfortable in order to allow this continuous adaptive behavior to happen. And so that's what we're trying to do, and that's what I hope that we will coordinate better, and I believe is necessary in order to make commercial space thrive, because it's in the national interest for this industry to thrive, to make UAS to thrive because it's in our national interest, to make airplane, helicopter, balloon operations, allow them to continue to thrive because it's in our national interest. And the more we can talk, the more we can understand each other's needs and what we value, the faster we'll get this all done. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and a great set of challenges, I think, that you have outlined. Now, Mike, your office, Commercial Space, has a significant portfolio of different things that you're doing, not only from a regulatory perspective, but also from promotion perspective. So can you maybe outline some of the things that you have going and
Sure. Yeah, and let me, I'll also try to tie together some of the pieces of what we heard here today. Before I do, Margaret, thank you, and thanks to all of RTCA again, and thanks to all of you, the hale and hearty here, who not only stayed to the last panel of the forum, but as Hassan said, the best panel of the forum. So thanks.
Very good.
So yeah, I think one of the misconceptions that exists about commercial space is people say, well, you're safety, but you're also that promotional activity. I think the way we view that, Hassan, is if we're doing good government, we're promoting the growth of the industry. There's not a separate and standalone promotional aspect to what we do. We really work try to work well with the companies who are moving at light speed. Bill said the speed of business. I think the folks we regulate take that up a couple notches in terms of the innovation they're bringing to the table and the need to get those products to market. We're also seeing tremendous growth across that. So we do regulate from the point of view of public safety, national security, foreign policy interests of the U.S. And in my organization and the divisions that I manage, we run the full gamut of working early with the companies and do what we call pre-application coordination. We have a lot of entrepreneurial companies, a lot of folks that are new to the dealing with government. We need to work with them and ensure how they understand the regulatory framework. We can work to crystallize what they need to be applying for, what the evaluation is going to entail, identify some of the airspace and other integration challenges we have. We probably deal, as a small organization in the FAA, we're probably more interconnected than most. We have to deal with air traffic very closely. We have to deal with the Office of Airports very closely. We have to work with aviation safety very closely on the captive carry type vehicles that Tim was outlining. So we have to be very well netted and integrated across the agency, but at the same time work and keep pace with that business environment. Once we accept an application for evaluation, we're unique in the agency as well. If it's an experimental launch permit, we've only got 120 days to make a determination of whether we're going to authorize that mission or not. If it's a license for a launch or a spaceport, we've got 180 days. So we have to work carefully with the industry, work carefully with our partners across the agency, make sure all the issues are identified on the table and that we've got solutions identified with the applicant to how we're going to deal with that. At the same time, we're seeing tremendous growth. You see, Kevin and Tim talked about some of the concepts. Eric talked about the span of what he's seeing at CSF. We're seeing tremendous diversity. We're seeing tremendous innovation. I can't tell you how many firsts we've had this year in terms of things that we've licensed or regulated that have been done by the industry. Kevin talked about a couple. There are many more out there in terms of first of a kind, reusability, flying back to land and barges and land landings, all these sorts of things. And that takes an approach where we have to really target effective regulation. So that's one of the promotional things in making sure that framework, we actually have a 20-year-old framework that has to evolve and adapt to what the industry is doing. But on the growth side, let me jump back to that a little bit. Back in 2015, when we first started tracking the numbers of projects and entities that we're dealing with, we were dealing with roughly 25 unique projects in the office of about 100 people. At the end of 2015 fiscal year, I'm a government guy, so I talk fiscal years, we had 44 projects that we were dealing with in pre-application, even before we're evaluating. Beginning of this fiscal year, end of 2016 fiscal, we had 59, and now we're dealing with roughly at any given time 70 unique projects with about 50 different companies or entities seeking approvals from the FAA. So that the growth is there. It harbors it portends a very robust and growing industry, things that we're going to be seeing. But at the same time, I think we're also seeing, in terms of the actual operations, it's a measured growth. It's not an unbridled growth. It's not going back to the days of a decade ago, we're not going to be blackening the skies with swarms of rockets, but we're going to see a steady increase in frequency that we have the opportunity to get ahead of. Heidi talked about the fact we've been doing this for 30 years, and that's true. There's a lot we've learned over time. There's a lot we know how to do, and a lot we can leverage as we extend out the principles of how we've managed these operations and bring new technologies to bear to continually make them more efficient, less impactful on the national airspace. Programs like our Space Data Integrator program that's automating the input of vehicle telemetry into NAS situational awareness so that we can reduce the amount of airspace we're planning to use, respond more effectively to contingencies, and release that airspace when it's no longer needed. Those are the types of investments we're working for at the agency to make this happen. Now, Bill mentioned Michael's charter. A couple of years ago, Michael set forward a strategic initiative to ensure that we're integrating the new entrant operations into the NAS, and that those new entrants and the others are realizing the benefits, the nation's realizing the benefits of those operations. Last August, I was asked by our Deputy Administrator, Victoria Wassmer is acting, to form a commercial space executive working group that brought together executives from across the entire agency. We've got somewhere around 20-25 executives on the team to really drive towards coordinated planning and execution of our activities. Bill's on the team, and several others from ATO. We've got folks from AVS and airports, again, finance, policy offices, legal, you name it, they're there, so that we can work in a coordinated manner on key issues facing the FAA as it relates to integrating space. And then we report to what's called our new entrants board, which is the same framework that we've been using for UAS. We divert it once a month and talk commercial space issues and report the progress. So again, a lot that's going on, but our entire goal here is to get the agency on one page, have one plan for what we're doing, and have the stakeholder feedback for how we're doing that. So some of the things that we did is back in January, we published our first enterprise architecture that had a commercial space roadmap in it. In the meantime, we're continuing to work to refine that. We're working to define what does it really mean to integrate space operations in the NAS, get to a common definition, upgrade our concept of operations that Kevin actually worked on and published back in 2014 to take advantage of the things we've learned. And then bring that out to the stakeholders to get feedback, working in that next-gen environment, making sure that all the things we're trying to do, aviation and space, are lined up. Some other things that we're doing as a result of that, Bill mentioned, how do we prioritize? How do we get that access together in the NAS? And this summer, we'll be rolling out under the ARC frameworks, the Aviation Rulemaking Committee framework, we're going to be bringing forward a group to look at how does the space industry and the aviation industry get together to examine what are the business drivers, what are the constraints operationally that exist between the two communities, what are the respective needs, how can those things be married together and have the industry stakeholders develop a prioritization scheme or recommendations on how to prioritize across those various constituencies so that we can factor that in to our considerations as we're trying to allocate that limited resource and make sure that everyone can be successful. So we anticipate that starting up over the summer as we're going through the final prep stages and formulation on that. You mentioned spaceports. There's a lot of emotion around spaceports, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact, and a lot of things with space, is there's the diversity of it, but there's also not a common understanding. One of the things Michael's talked about, I think the first time he talked about it publicly, Eric, was at the annual conference that you hosted with us, about the need to develop a scheme of categories for spaceports. The reality is, people think spaceports, they immediately think Kennedy Space Center. They think big iron, heavy vehicle launches. But the reality is this industry is so diverse. Space launches range from balloons taking people to the edge of space, to the Heavy, Falcon Heavy that Kevin was describing. And in the middle, there are a host of there's small launchers that are taking small payloads up. There are winged vehicles that can operate like aircraft that can fly to remote locations, light the rockets and go to space. Suborbital, all have different impact, all have different integration challenges. So coming up with a scheme that describes at face value what are we trying to achieve at a given spaceport, first off, will demystify it, but also show and guide the folks who are pursuing spaceports to what can and will work at those locations. Do you want to have something at a location that can only take off and land like a conventional aircraft under air traffic control procedures, or can you have something that's more aggressive in terms of how it accesses space? So that's, again, something we'll be pursuing out in the summer to get stakeholder input on as well. I probably used up more than my fair share of time here, Hassan, but there's a lot going on. I think we've come a long way as an agency to really get aligned and moving in one direction. Our intent is to continue to work aligned across the industry, space and aviation, so that we really do come together and make this a reality for everybody in a way that works for everybody.
Great. No, thank you, Mike. Very informative. And at this point, let me just invite the audience, if you have any questions, raise your hand or go ahead and tweet them in. But I do have a couple of areas that I picked up. First of all, safety has been a theme during the past couple of days, and we've talked about it here just now. So can you maybe, Kevin and Tim, kind of talk about generally as you look at your operations and kind of look at your processes, how do you integrate that safety processes in what you do in terms of launches? And I know, Kevin, you mentioned you've got a launch coming up in a week or so. How does that all work? I know there's a lot that goes into it, working with the FAA and within your own system. How do you bring it all together?
Right. Yeah, I would say this also is an area where we see potential for improvement. So we, obviously, in addition to our mission assurance, which is our internal programs to ensure the safety of a launch, we also work with the FAA to ensure the safety of the public, which includes persons on the ground and persons in the air in airplanes. And that's where we get to what Heidi mentioned, which is where we close off areas of airspace to aircraft to ensure safety. I think, when you look at how that came about and how long that's been in place, legacy operations occurred, you may have seen operations maybe once a month in the past, many years ago. And now we come to the present where we're looking to launch every 2 weeks and other operators are looking to launch more frequently. And the same approach doesn't necessarily scale in terms of NAS impact. It's in our interest to have a small NAS impact because it gives us flexibility in launch scheduling. Currently, obviously, if we go to the FAA and say we want to launch the day before Thanksgiving and we want a 4-hour launch window, they're going to say, no, we'd rather you not do that. That's not good for the NAS due to traffic. If we can evolve to a point in the future where we have dynamic systems where ATO and AST can dynamically work with us on launch plans and launch frequencies and launch schedules, and where the ATO can react dynamically to events, both nominal and off-nominal, then we can get to a point where we no longer have to close huge amounts of airspace. Maybe we only close a smaller amount of airspace and for a shorter duration of time. And I think those are areas where there are both procedural and technological solutions that as Bill and Mike know, and in coordination with NextGen, I know they've all been working on some of these issues and looking at them. And I think that's the right way to go. And it's important to start working on that now so that when these launch rates do increase and materialize at that level in the future, that FAA and the NASA are ready to handle that.
Wow. Yes.
Hey, Joe.
If you get land on a barge, can you take off on a boat?
Can. I mean, 10 years ago, someone would have said we can't land on a barge either. So I would say that's not in a plan, though. Due to ground support, the necessary ground support infrastructure for a launch is so significant that I don't think that would be feasible.
Okay, well, there is certainly a lot of, as you've seen, a lot to talk about. This was a short segment, but really some very interesting conversations. And I hope, as Heidi mentioned, that this is a beginning of a conversation and we can continue to have these things. Again, thanks to RTCA, and join me in thanking this panel this afternoon.